Okay. Well, let me welcome everybody and particularly welcome Linda Stern, our guest speaker this evening. Linda is an award-winning financial journalist. She's a former Wall Street editor for Reuters, and she was a columnist for AARP on their Money Matters column. How many years did you do that, Linda?
I think I did that for about 3 years.
3 years.
But I
Okay.
wrote for them before then, but in terms of doing that regular column, it was 3 years.
That's great. I read it every month. It was
Thank you.
you always had great advice. Her work has been featured on the web, wire, radio, television, and in magazines, newspapers, and books. And she's the author of Money Smart Secrets for the Self-Employed, which was published by Random House. And so without further ado, Linda, I will turn it over to you. Kelly, how are we handling questions to begin with?
I believe Linda was going to give a little spiel and then we'll just kind of go from there. And if anyone has questions, you'll be able to ask them or even post them in the chat. If you want us, we can read them for you as well.
Right.
Perfect.
Okay. Great. All right, Linda.
Thank
take
you.
it over.
I thought I would talk for just a minute or two about myself and how I got involved in this subject matter, and then generally give an overview on my philosophy of retirement planning, and then open it to questions. But I do have some information prepared in response to earlier questions your group gave me about giving money, charitable giving and certain other retirement plan and tax questions. So we could cover a lot or just get really narrow. I started as a financial reporter with an English major and not very much knowledge of economics, but I was a macroeconomic reporter for a small business paper when Ronald Reagan was president. And as many of you might remember, that was really a stunning time to be covering macroeconomics. And I kind of learned on the job by covering the Federal Reserve, by covering the Hill, all the big budget battles, the Great Recession, the 21% prime rate. And I learned a lot of really sophisticated economic policy, but I had no experience whatsoever of actually managing personal finance. I'd never opened a brokerage account. I had trouble balancing my checkbook. And, I'm one of the generation who women didn't even have their own credit cards until the early 70s. So I think by the time I was a financial writer in the early 80s, I did have credit cards, but I wasn't that great at personal finance. And along the way, I had 2 small children, and things at work were just difficult, and I decided to just quit for a while. And the day that I quit, a editor at Reuters news service called me up and said, "You want to do a personal finance column?" And at that time, personal finance was brand new because 401ks were new. And that's what really kicked off the whole personal finance industry, that you had all these companies like Fidelity and T. Rowe Price and Vanguard, and they were all putting a lot of money into advertising. So all the news organizations were hiring people to write about how you should handle your retirement, because for the first time ever, people had to handle their own retirement. And I say that it was on-the-job training, but I basically indulged myself by being able to use that column, which was syndicated, to ask everybody anything I really wanted to know. And as I learned, it all showed up in the column. But that was 40 years ago, or around there, 35 years ago. And since then, I spent a lot of time writing a column. I got good at that subject matter. I was a regular contributor to Newsweek. And this is kind of funny, but one year I spent being the personal finance page editor for both AARP and Cosmopolitan magazine at the same time. So I was seeing people's financial questions from both ends of the age spectrum. And then I eventually I went back to work full-time as a Wall Street editor for Reuters, which was a New York job, and got me deep into investing. And then I retired and was fully retired for a couple years. And then an editor at AARP called me up and said, "Do you want to do this column?" And it was kind of just enticing. He was a great person to work for. It's a great organization. And so I did that column for 3 years or so, and just retired again. And tomorrow is my 70th birthday. So I kind of felt like it was time to do something different. And that is how I acquired my personal finance expertise.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Along the way, I got very opinionated about the way the personal finance industry is run. And I kind of have my own philosophy about retirement investing. And I would, thank you. I would say that it's not brain surgery. Like, people get really scared, and sometimes they go to financial advisors who are the wrong kind of advisors, and they make it seem super complicated, like you couldn't possibly understand it. But it's pretty easy. Like, your job as a working person is to save money that you will use to live on when you leave the working world. And you have to be in a mix of stocks and other investments like money funds or cash or bonds. Like, you can't just be in stocks. It's my opinion you can't afford to not be in stocks. A big believer in the philosophy of index investing, which most of you know what that is, but in case anybody doesn't, it's where a mutual fund company buys a broad array of stocks and just tries to match the performance of the Standard & Poor's 500 or the Dow Jones Industrial Average or something like that. And they keep these very, very low. There's a lot of research showing that the amount of fees that you pay hidden in mutual funds or to financial advisors can make the difference between a successful, comfortable retirement and one that's not very comfortable. I also think that people, sometimes the financial industry will say, well, what if you run out of money when you get old? But that's rarely the way it happens. Like, people get older, they don't have as much money. They limit their lifestyle the way they do when they're younger and they don't have enough money. You buy less, you travel less, maybe you downsize your house. So I think that there's, people have a certain amount of wiggle room in the way they manage their money. And then when you get to the stage of withdrawing money, the rule of thumb is called the 4% rule. And that is that the first day or year of your retirement, you take 4% of your retirement savings as a withdrawal. And then every year you take that same amount plus an inflation kicker. So last year inflation was like 8%. So if you took 50,000 out in the first year, or let's say you took 20,000 out in the first year, then what, 8% of that would be another $160. Do I have that right? So, 1,000. So you'd take $21,600 out the second year and inflate it every year by the inflation amount. I don't think that's a good way to go about it. I think a better way to go about it is to withdraw a little bit more early in your retirement when you're very active, when you're spending more money because you're maybe buying a new retirement wardrobe or doing some travel that you deferred or fixing up your house or whatever. And then not necessarily inflating it every year, because even if you spend more in your 60s, by the time you're in your mid 70s, you're likely to not travel as much, not buy as many things for your home or your body. And it's very clear that the way that people spend money is faster earlier in retirement, much slower in the middle of retirement, and then heavier at the end of retirement as they need long-term care or medical care. So that's my philosophy for spending. They call it go-go, slow-go, and no-go as the 3 stages of retirement. And all of those withdrawals assume that you have a portfolio that is mixed, that has stocks in it. And some people think, oh, I'm too old for stock market because I need my money now. But even if you're at 70 years old, as I am, and withdrawing money, I expect to still be withdrawing money for another 10 or 15 years. And even if I am not lucky enough to live that long, I don't want to die with my last dollar, I would like to have money in my account to pass to my heirs. So I think that's a reason to stay fully invested in a mix of things, even as you age. And I'm going to take a pause there because I threw a lot at you, and see if anybody has any questions thus far about retirement saving and investing.
I have a question, Linda. So you were mentioning about financial advisors. So, and of course, there's a fee involved. So who do you use, or do you manage it yourself in order to not pay those additional fees?
That's a good question, and I do have an answer. I'm putting in the chat room a couple of places to look for financial advisors. I feel like unless you really want to do all your own money management and you enjoy it, that you probably need somebody to help you with your money. I feel very strongly that you should pay that person for their expertise, and therefore you should find somebody who's a fiduciary, who is not selling you mutual funds or insurance policies that have a lot of fees hidden in them. And there are a lot of, they used to call themselves stockbrokers. Now even people who were stockbrokers call themselves financial advisors. And the key to finding one that's really a fiduciary is to say, are you a fiduciary? Do you make any money on commissions, or is it just fee only? And if you're fee only and you're fiduciary, then you know that they have your interest at heart and primary, and they will find mutual funds for you that don't have a lot of hidden fees. You can save money on a financial advisor if you're comfortable with a generic financial plan where they find you some mutual funds and they tell you, like, put 50% in this stock index fund and 20% in this bond fund and 10% in this money market fund and 20% in real estate. And they find the funds for you. And then you say, okay, I can do this on my own now. I'll just rebalance every year. In other words, every year, make sure that those percentages stay the same. And so one of the places that I listed was the Garrett Planning Network. They have advisors who are fiduciaries, who are good, and who will help you set up a financial plan, but won't necessarily want to manage it year to year to year if you want to take it over. That's one way to go. And there are a lot of companies that are, low fee, like Charles Schwab, Fidelity Investments. Vanguard is the king of low fee investing. And they also have advisors on staff that will help you develop a mix of mutual funds. And depending on how deeply you go into the advice, they will, if you're just going to use their funds, they will help you pick a portfolio of funds and not charge a fee. But if you want them to really give you a full portfolio, analyze what you already have, look at other things like tax and insurance, then they will also charge fees. But they're a pretty good place to start if you don't have extraordinary situation in your personal life.
Okay, another question pertaining to that.
Mhm.
So how often should you be reviewing that, or should your financial advisor be reviewing that? Is it up to you to make sure that that's a periodic adjustment?
I think that the way that I believe you should approach investing is pick what it's called an asset allocation, and that's those percentages. Like, say you have, and this is a rule of thumb people throw around a lot, but take 120 and subtract your age, and that's the amount you should have in stocks. That's very conservative. So say you're 70, that means 50% of your portfolio should be in the stock market. My personal portfolio has more in the stock market. I don't sell when it looks bad, and I don't sell when it looks good, and I don't sell in an attempt to beat the market or get out of the way ahead of a crash. I pretty much just try to keep my percentages the same. And I think there are a lot of people that say that if you rebalance once a year, you're doing well. So say you have 50% of your money in stocks, 30% in bonds, 20% in cash. And you can, make it, you can branch out by doing some foreign stock, some small stock, blah, blah, small cap stock. Doesn't all have to be one fund. But after a year, if the stock market's done poorly, as it did in the last year, you might find out that your portfolio is now only 45% stock. So you take some money out of one of the other two categories, move it over to the stock fund, and keep your averages the same. And what the rebalancing does is it kind of forces you to buy low and sell high, because you're putting more money into stocks when stocks have gone down. Had the market been really good and you found yourself with like 60% stocks, 25% bonds, and 25% something else, you take some money off the table in the stock market, move it to the bond market. And so it's really simple. I mean, maybe it doesn't sound simple, but you set up a group of funds, you figure out what percentages you want, and then every year you look at it once a year and keep those percentages the same. And that will protect you from catastrophe and allow your money to grow. Some people do like to try to time the market, and they say it's a loser's game, but I do feel like if the market's gone up and up and up and up for years, or you own particular stocks that have gone up like crazy, excuse me, sometimes you want to take a little bit off the table and put it in cash and wait for a decline and then buy more. But that's really unnecessary. It's more like if that's your hobby, you could finesse it that way.
That's one of the reasons that I like having a financial advisor, because he looks at all that stuff for us.
Right.
One of the things that he's done for us in the last year is to look at something that is going to pay out dividends that are going to cost us more in taxes. And so he, with my permission, he moves things around. So
Right.
we have less of a tax burden.
That's a good idea. If you, I was going to talk about this as well, but it's really nice if you can have different packages of money in retirement that have different tax treatment. So if you have a 401k or an IRA, that's tax deferred. And then you have a regular after-tax investment account that's just taxed normally. And you have a Roth IRA. If you have those three things, then you can kind of manage your taxes quite a bit, because you can do things like put the bonds that have high interests, and high dividends, and put them in the 401k or the IRA. And you can take individual stocks that you would just pay a capital gain on, or real estate, and put that in a real estate fund, for example, put that in the regular taxable account, or the Roth. And that's one way to manage your taxes. Another way is, if you're living on withdrawals, take some from the Roth, some from the IRA, and some from your regular investment account, so that you're not taking too much from your IRA every year and bumping yourself into a new. It's good for retired people to know what their tax bracket is, because then you can finesse your withdrawals so that you stay in a certain tax bracket and don't move up too high.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And if you do move up too high, you not only pay a penalty in taxes, but you also will pay a penalty in higher Medicare premiums every year or every month. So,
Linda,
one thing that a lot of people advise is setting up a Roth, even if you're already retired or close to retirement, by taking some money out of your IRA and rolling it into a Roth. And doing that, like if you just retire and you have a year or two when your income is kind of low, then you can use that time to take some money out of your tax deferred IRA and create a Roth called a rollover Roth, or put money into your existing Roth, and you will pay tax on that. But if you do it in a year when your taxes are somewhat low, then or lower than they might otherwise be, that gives you a bunch of money in that Roth that you can let grow, and it won't be taxed anymore as long as you live.
Linda, I have a question about, a few minutes ago, you mentioned the 4%, I guess, philosophy
Uh-huh.
on withdrawing money.
Mhm.
And that 4%, I am assuming, is applicable to all of the pots of money that you have, or just to say if you have an IRA
Mhm.
and maybe a pension plan that
Mhm.
is, paying you benefits on a monthly basis.
Right.
Should that have any impact on the 4% or how much you're going to withdraw
That's a
from
good
your IRA?
question. The 4% is kind of a loose way of saying that the money in this pot is going to last forever. So
No.
I would look at it separately because the pension is paying you a set amount that you're not determining, right? It's just,
Right.
so then I would just look at the savings that you control and take 4% of that and say, well, as long as this is invested, I can afford to take 4% out and I won't run out of money.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And like I said, I feel like, most of us are capable in a bad year of, in a good year, we're capable of, taking that extra trip or, giving the kids extra money or, treating ourselves well. And I think if you take out 4% one year and then, the market is really bad the following year and you don't want to take out, 4% plus the 8% inflation, you could probably tighten your belt just a little and not take out more the following year.
Mhm.
And that's sort of the way I'm told that a lot of people run their withdrawals that way. They just kind of use their judgment in terms of what they're comfortable with from one year to the next. And they don't always spend more in one year than they did in the previous year,
Okay.
even with the price of eggs doubling. Even with,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I just bought some of those eggs this evening.
Yeah.
They are another question that I know came up, and I know I'm in this situation. I'm just a few months ahead of you, Linda, but that at 70 and a half, it's
Mhm.
possible to make qualified charitable distributions, and that has some tax advantage to it.
Yeah. Charitable contributions are still deductible if you itemize your deductions,
Mhm.
but the standard deduction is up to about $25,000 a year now. So very few people have it, and it's capped for taxes. So very few people have enough deductions to trigger the standard deduction.
Oh, okay.
So one way that you can, if you want to contribute a lot of money, one way that you can do that is just contribute once for like 5 years, like, give somebody $25,000 and then, don't give anybody anything for 5 years or something like that. And that way you can just deduct it from your taxes. If you don't feel like you can afford to do that, or that's not the way that you want to go, you can take a small amount or a large amount up to $100,000 out of your tax deductible IRA and give it directly to a charity, and it will not trigger tax. Normally, if you take money out of an IRA
Right.
and you owe income tax on whatever you withdraw, if you give it directly to a charity, the IRA writes the check to the charity. There's no tax implication for you at all. So it is a way of getting money out of your IRA and saving taxes
Mhm.
on income and helping whatever charity that you want.
That's good. Now at 72 and a half, now we reached the required minimum distribution point.
Yeah.
And then somebody had talked about, well, maybe that's a good way to utilize that.
Yeah. A lot of people actually, once you look at how much you're required, does everybody know what I am talking about when we talk about required minimum distribution? Or should I back off and explain that?
Why don't you go ahead? Just
Okay, so if you have tax deductible savings in a 401k or an IRA, the government requires you to start spending it when you age so that you're not just amassing a large tax deferred forever pot of money. And it was 70 and a half that you had to start taking it. Now it's 72. And it's actually in 2023, it has moved to 73. So my husband, who turned 72 last year, no, he turned 72 this year. He keeps getting out of it one more year, if you know what I mean. If you turn 72 in 2023, you don't have to make a required minimum distribution until 2024.
Okay.
A lot of people need their RMDs. Like they don't actually, it's based on your life expectancy. And excuse me for a second. I think a lot of people, I think someone asked me about this, but last year the IRS did raise the life expectancy tables upon which your RMDs are calculated, which actually lowers the amount of RMD. And a lot of people live on that money. They actually take their full RMD and spend it. But if you have enough other things, if you have pensions, other savings, and the RMD is more than you need in a year, one thing you can do is give it to charity, and you can avoid the tax on the RMD by making a charitable contribution in that way. And this is kind of high finance, but the Secure Act, which just passed Congress at the end of December, allows people to take their money from their IRA and set up a charitable remainder trust or charitable annuity. And those are somewhat sophisticated vehicles, although charities can set them up for you easily. And that does something like, say, hypothetically, you want to give money to the American Red Cross. And so you give them a pot of money, and they pay you like the interest and dividends off of that money until you die. Then when you die, they get what's left. That's called a charitable remainder trust.
Okay.
And there's other ways. There's a way where you set aside a pot of money and they get the income and you keep the principal after a certain number of years. Like there's all different ways. If you have a particular charity that you like, there are a lot of ways that you can give money, get some money back, save taxes, and win, win, win. And before I leave that area, another way to do that, if you have stock that has appreciated in value or mutual funds that have appreciated in value, and they're not in an IRA, you can make a charitable contribution with those shares of stock. And then you don't have to sell them and pay capital gains or any other income tax on them. The charity will sell them, and because the charity is tax-free, they don't have to pay tax on it. So it's a way of giving more money and avoiding the taxes. And the last, well, there's three more things to say about charities. The first is that since for most people, their charitable deductions are no longer deductible, another way to look at it is you could give more money to political groups and less money to authentic charities. You know, like if you wanted to deduct it, you can't give money to somebody's campaign or lobbying organization because those are not tax deductible contributions. But if you're not going to be deducting them anyway, you can become more political with your money if you want to. The second thing I'll say about charities is that for a couple years in the COVID era, you could do a $300 charitable deduction, even if you didn't itemize deductions, but that's no longer the case. So that's not good for 2022 or 2023.
Oh,
That was just 2020 and 2021. And the last thing I'll say is another way to become charitable, if you want to, is to set up something called a donor advised fund. And you can do that through the Montgomery County National Capital. I can't remember exactly the name of it, but there is like a charitable foundation that's like the Montgomery County Charitable Foundation. We have one in Tacoma Park. There's probably one where you live, but you can also do them through Fidelity Investments, T. Rowe Price, Charles Schwab. And what they are mutual funds that are actually charities. So you send them your money all in 1 year, and you can also fund that with stocks if you have shares of stock. But you need like something like $5,000 to $10,000 to start. And you get a deduction in the year that you put the money in if you give them enough for it to be, if you exceed the standard deduction in your personal filing.
Mhm.
So say you take $20,000, you have $5,000 in other deductions like taxes or mortgage interest or something. You put $20,000 in one of these accounts, you get an immediate tax write-off, and then you can let the money grow in that account as long as you want, or you can have them distribute it whenever you want them to, however you want them to, by just calling them up or sending them a letter or filling out an online form. And so it makes you a little bit, it's like if you ever dreamed of having a personal foundation, it's as close to that as you can come without spending a lot of money for, a lawyer and foundation documents and whatnot. It's kind of a nice way. I have a friend who inherited one from her parents, and she really enjoys giving away larger chunks of money, and not even that enormous, but if you can, instead of giving $20 here and $20 there, if you can give an organization you really care about $1,000 or $3,000, it can make a big difference in the way that you feel and what they're able to do with it. So that's a lot about charity. Are there any questions about charity before we move away from that?
Just to clarify for me, you would be giving them the money. Do they set up the fund, or?
It is a pre-existing fund, and so
Okay.
it's like a mutual fund, but it is a charitable, or it's a 501c3, but it's run like a mutual fund. And so you have your own name, you could have the, William McDonald Family Fund. You can call it whatever you want. And that's who signs the checks. But you can just let the money accumulate there. And then, in 1 year, you could give whatever, the, YMCA or the National Cancer Society or whatever Boys and Girls Clubs, whatever is near to your heart. The other thing you can do if you pay dues to a church or synagogue is, that's a charitable deduction, and you can use these funds to pay your annual dues or your, monthly dues, or however your house of worship collects money. So that's something else that you can do.
I'm
Then
writing
I have a
notes.
question about. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
Going back to Remainder Trust.
Mhm.
Are Remainder Trust applicable to religious organizations?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them can do that. A lot of religious organizations, if you have a church or synagogue or mosque that you're very involved in, you ask them to talk to you about the various ways that they can take money. Because most of them will know how to set up a charitable, there's a lot of them. There's like a charitable remainder trust, charitable annuity trust. I think there's a third one, I forget the name of it, but they, like I said, there's a lot of, they're formal things that usually require a legal document, and the IRS has guidelines for like how much income they, how the shared income works, how much income they can throw off. It's all in the tax code. It's not like you're just making it up on the fly. But people who are in charge of development at organizations like any nonprofit, including churches, they usually are familiar with these vehicles and could help you set one up if you wanted to. And sometimes, like people that have old stocks, like, say you bought AT&T or General Electric, 40 or 50 years ago, or Apple or whatever, and or you had a job where you got shares of stock that have appreciated a lot. If you sell them now, they would create a very high capital gains tax. But you could use those things to set up a charitable trust that would spit off income to you, that would give you the monthly income you need without paying the tax on selling the security. And those are the kinds of things that wealthy people have done forever. I mean, I think it takes a certain amount of money to make it worth the effort to set up a charitable trust, but If you fit that, and if you want to be, if you wanted to give a substantial amount of money, you had the shares of stock, something like that. It could be a very economical way to give money.
Okay.
I'm going to try, well, if somebody has another question, that's good, because I'm going to try to look up a couple of these Fidel organizations and post the links to them.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
I do have a question. If we're a 501(c)(3) Postal Seniors, is there some vehicle that we should set up in order to receive those types of donations?
Wait,
Or is it all from the giver's perspective?
you mean your particular organization is already a 501(c)(3)?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I guess you should just publicize that you want people to give you money, right? And if anybody wanted to like leave a bequest or leave a substantial amount of money, you would have to do a lot more research or hire a lawyer or something to figure out how they could set up a charitable trust.
Okay. So they set up the trust and we don't have to have any particular vehicle for them to put that money into.
No.
Okay.
That's a very long, I thought I got that shorter, but that's the Fidelity Charitable Trust. Let me see. I mean, you could tell people about like these donor advised funds are like an in-between state. They're in between just writing a check to an organization and setting up a whole trust, which would be, a one family trust.
Mm-hmm.
And you can call it your family fund, but it's not legally a trust. It's legally a 501(c)(3).
So how does that differ from a trust?
A trust, it's like, I don't know how to describe it. These charitable organizations that are at mutual fund companies and brokers, it's a charitable fund. You're contributing to a fund. It's not a trust. You don't have a family trust.
Okay.
But you do have the ability to hand out the money that you put in and that it earns. Like you have your own account. You have your own account at that organization. Just like you might have an IRA at Fidelity. So you would have, or I don't know, Vanguard or, T. Rowe Price or whatever. It would be your own mutual fund account, but instead of being called Bill McDonald IRA, it would be called Bill McDonald Charitable Fund.
Mm-hmm.
A full trust is more like you have to sign a lot of legal documents and it's set up officially as a legal trust you have to have a trustee. The fees are higher, the management fees might enter into it.
Much
yeah.
more complex.
Right. Now, if you were doing it just with one agency, one like a church, or like if you talk about a big national organization or an alma mater or college, I have a friend who used to be a fundraiser for George Washington University. They for sure know how to set up those trusts. So if you say to them, I have $100,000, I want to set up my own charitable trust with GW, they will walk you through the steps. But if you want to set up your own family charitable trust and maybe give to more than one organization, you probably need your own lawyer.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I've heard of the, family trust before, and I wasn't really sure how they were different.
Well,
No,
some
I
people
understand.
it's interesting because some people have these accounts and call them trusts.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they're legally trusts or not, but I mean, I do know somebody who inherited one of these accounts, and she said, oh, I inherited a family foundation. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's impressive. And then it turned out it was a Fidelity account, which is still great, but it's not the same thing as a foundation or a trust. So
I see.
yeah.
Huh. I see another question.
Mhm. Great.
Um,
Oh, long-term care insurance. I'm a bad person to ask because I don't have a lot of faith in the insurance industry. I think that long-term care, I do have a resource to share in regard to that though. So, long-term care insurance, there's too many companies that sold it and then weren't really prepared to actually pay the benefits. And, they charged their rates went up so much that you couldn't really afford to keep your policy, or they wouldn't pay the policy. So a lot of these are problematic. That being said, if you have a good plan and a good company and you need it, you'll probably be happy to have it. It gets extremely expensive once you're over 65 or 70 to buy a plan. I'm more in favor of self-insuring because it's unusual for somebody to need long-term care longer than 2 years. And what they say is if you have less than like $150,000, then you will probably spend down your money and qualify for Medicaid. And if you have more than $500,000, you will be able to pay your own bills. And so long-term care insurance is a product for people who have between $125,000 and $500,000 and want to protect their money from having to go into a nursing home and spend all their money when they might want their spouse or their kids to be able to use that money. What I just posted here is a Maryland state actually does something that's really helpful with regard to long-term care insurance. They have a partnership, and the way these work is if you buy long-term care insurance that covers you for like 3 to 5 years, and you actually consume all of that, then the state will take over and pay your benefits so that you don't have to spend your own money. You don't have to spend money down to a level where you could require Medicaid. So, excuse me, you're buying insurance that's capitated, so it's cheaper, it's more affordable, and it's more reasonable product. You're just buying 3 years of coverage or 5 years of coverage, and then the state will pick up the rest, or a part of the rest. So that's worth looking at if you're interested in long-term care insurance. It's a very good program.
That wasn't available 15 years ago.
No. Well, if you have a policy that's 15 years old and it's still a good company, then you're good.
So far, so good, but they
Yeah.
did raise the rates. Mhm.
Yeah. What company do you have it with?
Gosh, you'd think I could call that off the top of my
that's
head,
okay.
but I can't.
Somebody asked me what I think about managing your mother versus Morgan Stanley and the idea that they grow faster. You mean that Morgan Stanley will grow your money faster, or that you'll grow your money faster? I'm not quite sure what that question is.
That came from Ron.
It looks like he might just want to know, is it better to manage your own money versus Morgan Stanley managing it for you?
I see. I'm not a huge fan of Morgan Stanley because they came out of that, they came out of the era of hidden fees and commissions, and a lot of their advisors still have that. If you have a Morgan Stanley advisor who's been growing your money really fast, be happy. But that's not where I would put my money, because there's too much variability in the advisors, and maybe they've just gotten lucky and that's why they're faster. Maybe they're taking bigger risks and that's why they're faster. And it's hard to discern exactly what you're paying in fees. So that's everything that I'm saying is my opinion, but that's definitely my opinion. I am not familiar with federal employee long-term care insurance, so I can't really speak to that plan. I do know a little bit about robot investing. There's a few companies. I don't know Fidelity specifically, but it's funny because about a really long time ago, when I first started learning about investing, I thought, can't you just put this on autopilot? Can't you just buy, a stock index fund, a bond index fund, and a money fund, and then rebalance once a year? And it's almost like autopilot. And in fact, that is what these robo investors do. And I think it's a good idea. I think, if your money is protected by SIPC, just like it would be with any other brokerage, and it's a legitimate brokerage, you keep your fees to a minimum and you have access to a broad market, and you're taking a lot of the complications and the trades out of investing. So I think that's a good idea. I did have some other topics besides investing. Let me just look through my notes and see if I've hit everything. But there's the tax bill that just passed, or the budget bill that passed, it not only gave you more ability to give money to charity through your IRA, but it also increased the amount that you can set aside. So anybody that's still working, you get higher catch-up contributions for how much you can put away in your 401k or 403b.
Does that still start at what, age 55?
I think so. And I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but I think that does start at 55, the catch-up contributions.
What do you remember what it's up to now? Because I took advantage of that, and it was.
I think that they used to be like 7,000 and now they're 10,000, but it depends on the kind of plan you have.
Right.
Okay, I'm also
And then a
what?
question, please, about the catch-up.
Mhm.
A catch-up only applicable to 401ks?
Also 403b.
Okay.
Mhm.
And I'm
What
not
about IRA?
Yeah, there are catch-ups for IRAs too, but I'm not sure if if they went up in the last bill.
Okay.
I can try to look that up quickly or I could send it around later. I'm not sure if this applies to IRAs, but somebody asked me about annuities, and I want to talk about that a little bit. There are a lot of people that like annuities, and there are a lot of people that like deferred annuities. So you can buy one now that doesn't kick in until you're like 80, and they're pretty affordable, and they'll pay out, like, instead of paying out 4%, they'll pay out 6%. So you might think that that's a good deal. But I don't like them because first of all, you're usually being sold an annuity because the person selling it to you is getting a lot of money in the first year. But there are low fee annuities, but I still don't love them because I think that in retirement, you don't spend your money the same amount every month, your whole retirement. You give away a chunk of money when you buy an annuity. You give away, say, $200,000 to buy a payout, and you don't have that $200,000 anymore. You just have the monthly payout. So what happens if you get injured and you end up having to be in a nursing home for 6 months while you're recovering? What if you're in rehab for 6 months and Medicare will pay like 2 months and then you have to pay, and you can't use that $200,000 for that because you already gave it away for the annuity, and the monthly amount that they're paying you isn't enough to pay for that immediate care. It's partly because I spent my career covering personal finance, that I would rather be in charge of my money than give my money away for a product like that. So, but there are people that like the security and feel like if you give away $200,000 and you say, well, this won't start paying me till I'm 80, but if I make it to 80, then I'm golden, with the payments from this. So I don't have to set aside as much money now. I can spend more money now and know that that's out there for the later years. Like, there are people that have that point of view as well. And you should, if you're interested in annuity, I guess, listen to them as well as me before making up your mind. A good retirement strategy for a non-working spouse. You should, a non-working spouse should you can have spousal IRAs. So if one person in a marriage is working and the other one isn't, you should make sure that you're paying into Roth IRAs or traditional IRAs for both members, not just the working member. And make sure that when a person who when I was at AARP, we got a very heartbreaking letter from somebody who said, my husband and I, we have, he basically left me and we don't have a good relationship. But, he picked me up recently and asked me to do him a favor and go sign these forms at his office. And I thought, he wanted, it made me feel good that I could help him and maybe it was helping our relationship. So I signed these forms and now I think I signed away his pension. And the answer was, yeah, that was like a really terrible thing to do. And he just kind of tricked her into doing it. But any pension automatically will have spousal benefits unless the spouse signs them away. That's federal pension law.
Mhm.
So anybody who retires with a spouse, they'll get a lower pension, but it'll last through both lifetimes. And it's a terrible idea to sign it away. Like sometimes advisors will say, we'll sign away the spousal benefit, you get a higher benefit, and then you can use the extra money to buy an annuity for your spouse, but that rarely works out right. Excuse me. I'm not used to talking this much.
I'm glad you got something to drink a little bit.
Kaizen, or is that like the notebooks? Is that what Kaizen is? Somebody, Beth said, what are your thoughts about Kaizen products? I don't know if is Beth still on? I don't see Beth. Oh, Beth, there you are.
Maybe she meant
I think the
Kaiser.
Kaizen product it sounded like it seemed a little complicated, but advantage of it was tax advantage, but it seemed kind of related to life insurance.
Yeah, I don't exactly know.
I had never heard about it either until a recent webinar on it, and I didn't completely understand it and just wondered if you had heard of it as well. So, okay, thank you.
It is
That
some kind of a
helps.
complicated life insurance thing, which I could read about, but honestly,
Yes.
I'm not familiar with it.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, there are products. I don't know why I'm echoing all of a sudden.
Yeah, I think some need to
Somebody needs to
mute
mute.
their
But,
mic,
okay,
mute
but
their microphone.
there
Thanks,
are good life insurance policies that roll long-term care into the life insurance policy. So you can use your benefits for long-term care or life insurance. And it's like a happy medium for people that think they might need one or the other. And I know that there are some good products like that. So that's another option in the life insurance space that will cover long-term care. Does a job in retirement affect your government benefits? Yes, to the positive. If you work when you're retired, it will probably raise your Social Security benefits, which will get recalculated when you reach full retirement age. So they can help you raise your benefits. I don't think it helps you raise your benefits once you're over your full retirement age. I think that that's the way that it works.
Right.
Which reminds me that the other thing I wanted to talk about was when to claim Social Security. I think as long as you can defer it until age 70, that's good. There were some really nice exceptions that have kind of run out unless you're my age or older, where the wife could, one spouse could claim benefits, the other spouse could claim spousal benefits and then switch to their own benefit. But that is all kind of expired for anybody born after 1953. So your benefits go up about 8.5% a year for every year that you don't claim them. And I retired young. I was only 64. And we actually lived off of our IRAs for a year and a half before my husband qualified for Social Security. And so we took way more than 4% out in those early years to protect our Social Security benefit so that it would get bigger. So if you can at all afford to defer your Social Security, I think it's like buying an 8% annuity is what it is. It's like kind of the best place for your money to be, even if you have to take money out of something else to do it. And another thing that a lot of people wonder about is their mortgages in retirement. I don't know how many people here still have mortgages. Mortgage rates have gone up a lot this year, but they're still way lower than most of us remember when they were double digits and higher. So I think if you have a low rate mortgage, keep it as long as you can. Don't take money out of savings to pay off a mortgage that's like 3% or 2.5% or 4%, because with the inflation and the higher interest rates that have been happening, that will probably continue to happen for a few years, you're better off keeping your money in savings where it will earn more than the mortgage will cost. And also, if you take money out of savings to pay off your mortgage, then you may find yourself cash poor in retirement, and you might have to sell your house to get at the cash, or use a reverse mortgage, which costs more than a regular mortgage. So it's another thing that I have kind of a non-standard view on, but I don't think having a mortgage into retirement is such a bad thing.
And then I have a sort of a general question here.
Mhm.
As you are moving through retirement,
Mhm.
do you have any, or would you have any suggestion on to a person as to when they would review their estate plans, which includes their financial plans and all of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I ask myself that a lot because my husband and I don't have, I mean, we have wills, but in terms of really setting up like, power of attorney and healthcare proxy and, who's, all of that, I kind of feel like as long as you and your spouse are able to make decisions for each other, that you don't have to do all that. But as soon as you're on your own, or if you're on your own, then you should definitely do that as early as possible and set up whatever you need. Like some people, two estate planning things in Maryland, you can make sure that your bank accounts are all payable upon death if you have them with another person. And so then they don't have to go through probate. The account just goes to that person when you die. The other option is to put everything in a living trust that automatically has a trustee that distributes everything. And my mother did that. When my mother died, I just had to write checks out of the trust to pay off her estate, and I didn't have to go through probate. But to be fair, my husband had to go through probate with his father's estate, and it wasn't that much harder. Like you still have to just account for all the money and fill out some forms either way.
Well, on speaking of trust, is there a limit as to, when I say limit, a specific amount that you need to have available in order to create a trust? Do you need 50,000, 100,000, 300,000?
I don't know the answer to that. It depends on the kind of trust. If you just want a living trust for distributing your whatever you own, it's probably a very low level. It's probably a low bar in terms of money. I think, lawyers maybe charge about $1,500, $2,000 to set up a living trust. That's a seat of the pants guess. I might be off. But if you're talking about a really complicated generation skipping trust to avoid taxes to enrich your grandchildren, there might be a higher level, a higher bar that makes it worth doing that.
Okay.
Linda, I see another question from Joan Olmsted. How do you figure out how much insurance you need as you age? Joan, you may want to
Oh,
clarify that.
well, I think that my husband and I gave up our life insurance. We don't have any because we feel like we have enough in savings to live the rest of our lives. And any kind of insurance, whether it's life insurance, health insurance, car insurance, well, it's really to protect you from the catastrophe you can't afford to pay. So if you still have people depending on you for income and you don't have money in savings, then you need enough life insurance to support them. And I think the rule of thumb used to be like 7 or 8 times your salary. That would support minor, like if you make 100,000 a year, then you should have about 800,000 in life insurance as a way of supporting your kids as they grow up. But if you age and you age out of some of those dependencies, then you need less and less life insurance.
So is,
Joan, your microphone's off.
Muted, yeah.
okay, so as I age, I've got 3 kids, so one's independent, hopefully in a few more years. 2 more will be more independent. So I would drop down from 7 or 8 times my salary down to 4.
Did you,
or-
I mean, do you currently have life insurance?
Yes.
So it's probably renewable at a low rate. Whereas if you reduce the amount of insurance that you have, you might have to buy a new policy that would cost more.
Yeah, it's term insurance. They seem to be renewing it still, but I'm afraid
yeah.
they might stop.
Because some, like some term policies, you buy 10 or 20-year renewable, and that guarantees what your fee is. But if it's not renewable, then I guess, yeah, you can buy less insurance as your kids get older and need you less.
Okay.
Or need your money less. They'd need you as much as ever. But yeah.
Okay, that's fine. And I know I have some in my federal program
Mhm.
too, so I could phase that out and keep this other term insurance policy I have too.
Yeah, one or the other. Yeah. What are your thoughts about unique investment opportunities such as property, Airbnb, or rental property? I think farm investments. Ooh, I don't know anything about farm investments except that my nephew is becoming a farmer, but I don't know anything about that. I do think that side gigs are great, whether they're, Airbnb or setting up an accessory apartment in your house or becoming a secret shopper or getting a part-time job or selling a craft that you make or whatever. I think having a different source of income is always a great thing. I don't know about, I don't know who iPhone is, but I don't know about all the things on that list and what specific particular opportunities you're talking about. So I couldn't really answer the details on that. I mean, if you can Airbnb in your own home or your own property that you already own, that's like a no-brainer. That's great if you feel comfortable doing that. And I-bonds are paying 6.89%. The only pitfalls with I-bonds, and it's a little, I-bonds, they have this weird thing. First of all, the government will pay you back. Even if the Republican Congress won't raise the debt ceiling, I feel pretty safe buying government bonds. But if inflation goes down, but interest rates go up, which happens sometimes, then you can actually kind of lose money on an I-bond. But locking in an I-bond paying 6.8% or 6.9% right now is not a bad deal. And I think that the way to do it is you have to set up an account with Treasury Direct, and you're only allowed to do $10,000. So you're not going to get rich on I-bonds, but it's a good safe way to gin up how much you're making. And one other thing to talk about while we're talking about investing in bonds and money market funds is you can lose a lot of money in bonds if interest rates go up. And not everybody understands that. Bonds are sold as safe investments. But like, say you buy a treasury bond and it's paying 5% and you pay $10,000 for it. And then interest rates go up to 7% and you're sitting there stuck with something making 5%. And you have to sell the bond. Nobody's going to give you $10,000 for it. They're going to give you like I can't do the math in my head, but they'll give you like $8,000 for it. So you lose money. If you're in a bond mutual fund or you own a bond and you have to sell it before it matures, then you can lose significant money in an era of rising interest rates. And we are in an era of rising interest rates because the Fed is raising rates because rates have been held artificially low. And we don't know how high rates are going to go because there's two components to rates. There's how much lenders want to make on the money and how much inflation feeds into it. So if you buy something short-term like a money market fund or a bank money fund or a bank savings account, you're earning lower interest, but the interest will follow the market up. And so I think the saying on Wall Street is cash isn't trash or something like that. That's what they're saying. They're saying sometimes it's better to keep your money liquid in a money market fund than it is to tie it up in bonds because as I just described, you can lose money in bonds.
Linda, I'm going to acknowledge the fact that we have selfishly kept you well past the 1 hour, and I wanted to acknowledge what a wonderful job you've done.
Thank you.
With us this evening. I see Dennis put in one more question. We'll do that, and let's call it a halt after that.
Okay. I did put a few resources in the chat, and I wanted to ask if you want me to mail the resources that I have to Kelly or Bill, then they could circulate them just in an email, and then you'd have them for future reference. Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, I think that'd be great
Okay.
because we could get that out to everybody.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Easily.
So I'm glad that you actually asked about laddering because it's a really great concept, and it solves the problem that I just described about losing money in bonds. So when you ladder, you can do this with bank CDs or with bonds. Typically, they pay more in interest if they're longer maturity. But you don't want to put all of your money in a 5-year CD because rates might go up and then you're stuck with all of your money locked in for 5 years. So divide your money into 5 piles and buy a 1-year CD, a 2-year CD, a 3-year CD, a 4-year CD, and a 5-year CD. And every year as it becomes due, you roll it over for 5 years. So at the end of 5 years, you have a rolling portfolio of 5-year CDs and you have money coming due every year. So it's a little bit like having 1-year CDs, but you're getting the returns of 5-year CDs. Did I blow through that too fast? Or
no, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. It really does.
And it's really a very good way to handle those kinds of investments, laddering.
Yeah. Back in the early 80s when we had another period of high inflation, I remember my father doing that.
Yeah, I remember. I don't know, many of you probably remember this, but people were putting money in money market funds and making like 15% a year. It seems crazy. But when we bought our first house, our mortgage rate was 14.25%. And now I understand why our parents thought we were insane. What I think about mortgage rates now is whatever rate it is, that's the best rate because if they go higher, you'll be glad you got today's rate. And if they go lower, you can refinance.
Good point.
So I don't think like, our kids are like, should I buy a house now? Should I wait? Whatever. I'm like, don't wait on the mortgage, like, because, do the mortgage when you're ready for the house and don't worry that much about the rate.
Good advice.
I mean, worry about it, but what I'm saying, don't try to time the rate. Don't wait for a better rate.
Well, Linda, thank you so much for all the advice you've given this evening. We really appreciate it, all the information you've shared, and we will get those links out to people.
Great. I will send you a few more, and then you can send them all together. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Linda.
Sure. Bye-bye.
I'm going to say good night to everybody then. Thank you for joining us this evening. Keep in mind that we do have a gala coming up on February 11th, and you can look for information about that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Anybody who's ever heard Gina Beck and the Sold Out Horns, and knows that it's going to be a great time that evening. So wanted to make sure we mentioned that. Linda, thank you again.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much for all your good messages and for the birthday greetings.
Thank you so much for being here and doing this for us. It was really great.
And wish you a happy birthday and a good evening.
Yes, happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, good night.
Good night, everyone.